I don't know why this trip felt different. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes when she told me about it. Maybe it was how she packed her bags 2 days early, like she couldn't wait to leave. Or maybe it was just my gut, the same gut that had been screaming at me for months that something was off. "Leland, you're overthinking this," she said, shoving a pair of heels into her suitcase. "It's just a business trip. 3 days. I'll be back before you know it." But I didn't know it. I knew something wasn't right. I watched her move around the bedroom, perfectly composed, while I stood there, feeling like my whole world was tilting. "You never travel for work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why now?" She let out a sharp breath, like I was exhausting her. "Because my boss asked me to, that's why. It's an opportunity, Leland. You know how hard I've been working." I knew how hard she had been working. Late nights at the office, always on her phone, smiling at messages she never let me see. I had told myself I was imagining things, that I was just being insecure. But this trip felt like confirmation of something I wasn't ready to face. "You could have said no," I murmured. She finally looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "I shouldn't have to." And that was it. That was the moment I realized that whatever we had before, whatever love, whatever connection, was slipping through my fingers. I didn't fight her. I didn't beg. I just watched as she zipped up her suitcase and grabbed her phone, already distracted by someone else. When she kissed my cheek goodbye, it felt cold. Routine. Like she was already gone. And for the next 3 days, I waited. I waited for her calls that never came. I waited for a text, an update, anything. But deep down, I already knew. I just didn't know how bad it would be when she came home. I don't know what I expected when she left. Maybe I thought she'd check in more often, send a goodnight text, or at least pretend to miss me. But after she walked out that door, it was as if I didn't exist. The first night, I stared at my phone more than I'd like to admit. I told myself I wouldn't be that guy, the clingy, paranoid husband who overanalyzes every little thing. But as the hours passed and my messages sat unread, I started to feel that familiar pit in my stomach, the same one I had ignored for months. I sent something casual at first. "Hope you made it safe. Let me know when you're settled." Nothing. Hours passed, and I saw the message was delivered, but not read. I convinced myself she was just busy, caught up with her coworkers, maybe exhausted from the flight. But deep down, I knew better. By midnight, my mind was racing. I opened our shared phone account, something I hadn't done in years, and checked the call logs. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but when I saw an unfamiliar number repeated multiple times over the last few weeks, always late at night, I felt my hands go cold. My pulse hammered in my ears. I tapped on the number and copied it into a search engine, my chest tightening with each second that passed. It was listed under a company name, something generic, untraceable. A burner number? Maybe? My fingers hovered over the call button, but I stopped myself. What was I even doing? What would I say? I tossed my phone onto the coffee table and ran a hand through my hair. I was losing it. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe this was all in my head. But that didn't explain the way she had been distant for months. It didn't explain the perfume she never wore for me. It didn't explain the cold, lifeless way she kissed me goodbye, as if I were nothing more than an obligation she had to check off her list. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house sounded like a whisper of doubt. Every passing car outside made me wonder if she was out there, doing something I couldn't take back once I knew the truth. The second day was worse. The silence stretched longer, heavier. My message still sat unread. I checked her social media, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared. I tried to distract myself with work, but the emails blurred together. The meetings felt meaningless. My coworkers must have noticed something was off because people stopped asking me questions, stopped engaging. I was there physically, but mentally, I was somewhere else, lost in thoughts I didn't want to have. That evening, I caved and called her. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. My stomach twisted. I waited an hour and called again. Same thing. She had either turned her phone off or blocked my calls. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. I wanted to believe she was just busy, that I was overreacting. But every second of silence screamed a truth I wasn't ready to hear. And then, late that night, a single message popped up on my phone. "Busy. Talk later." That was it. 2 words. No explanation. No warmth. Nothing. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I sat in the dark for a long time, gripping my phone, feeling something inside me crack. I had spent years building this life with her, trusting her. I had ignored every red flag, made every excuse. But now, sitting there in that empty house, I felt something shift. I wasn't going to ignore this anymore. I was going to find out the truth. I woke up the next morning with a weight on my chest, the kind that comes from knowing something is horribly wrong, but still trying to convince yourself it isn't. My wife was still gone, my phone was still silent, and my thoughts were a tangled mess of doubt, fear, and a gnawing sense of inevitability. But I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers anymore. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. I started where any suspicious husband would, our home computer. Melissa rarely used it anymore, favoring her phone and work laptop, but I knew she still logged into her accounts from time to time. I opened the browser history, my pulse quickening. And there it was, search after search for best hotels for business travelers, how to book a room without ID. And the one that hit me the hardest, romantic restaurants near me. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. This wasn't my imagination. I clicked on one of the hotel listings she had visited multiple times. It wasn't the one her company had supposedly booked for her. It was smaller, more intimate, the kind of place couples went to escape reality, not professionals attending a conference. My hands felt numb as I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed for the hotel. I didn't even think about what I was doing until a woman answered on the other end. "Thank you for calling Oakwood Suites. How may I assist you?" I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Hi. I was wondering if you could confirm a reservation for me. My wife, Melissa Warren, was supposed to be staying there for a business trip." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a reservation under that name." A cold wave washed over me. "Are you sure? Maybe it was booked under a corporate account." "We don't have any corporate bookings that match that name either," she said apologetically. "Are you sure she was staying with us?" I ended the call without responding. My hands were shaking. If she wasn't at the hotel she told me she'd be at, then where the hell was she? I tried calling her again. Straight to voicemail. I sent another message, this time more direct. "Where are you?" No response. I stood in the middle of our living room, staring at the walls that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Everything about my life, my home, my marriage, felt like a carefully constructed illusion, and I was only now realizing the cracks had been there all along. And then, something clicked. I rushed to our bedroom, grabbed her laptop from the bedside table, and opened it. Melissa had always been careful about passwords, but I knew she had a bad habit of reusing the same ones. I tried a few combinations, my hands trembling, until, click, the screen unlocked. Her emails loaded immediately, and that's when I saw them. A series of messages with a name I didn't recognize, Brent R. The most recent one, sent just 2 nights ago, made my stomach churn. "I can't wait to see you again. The last time wasn't enough. 3 days isn't enough." I clicked it open, reading each line over and over, feeling my heart pound in my ears. "You make me feel alive in a way I haven't in years. I hate that we have to hide this. But soon we won't have to." There were others. So many others. Some were brief, some long, but they all painted the same picture. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was planning something permanent. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing heavily. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was betrayal, premeditated and deliberate. And now, I had proof. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, my thoughts racing. What was I supposed to do? Confront her the moment she got back? Pretend I didn't know and gather more evidence? Call her out over the phone and listen to her scramble for excuses? I didn't have an answer yet. But one thing was clear. My wife wasn't coming home to the same man she left. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the laptop screen, the words of my wife's emails burning into my brain. It was all there. Her affair, her excitement, her plans for a future that apparently didn't include me. But what unsettled me the most wasn't the fact that she had betrayed me. It was how easily she had done it. How effortlessly she had crafted a separate life behind my back. I had spent the last decade thinking I knew this woman, believing we shared a bond built on trust, history, and the quiet comfort of routine. But looking at these messages, I realized I was nothing more than a bystander in my own marriage, a man living in a life that had become a well-rehearsed performance. She had been playing the role of a devoted wife while sneaking away to a life I had never been invited into. I needed air. I needed to get out of that house, away from the walls that suddenly felt suffocating. Grabbing my keys, I walked out without a destination in mind, my thoughts spiraling. As I drove, my hands clenched the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every passing car a reminder that the world was continuing as normal while my life was unraveling. I pulled into the parking lot of a diner on the outskirts of town, one of those places that hadn't changed since the 80s, with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. I slid into a booth near the window, rubbing my temples as a waitress approached. She had that tired but kind look, the kind of woman who had seen enough people going through something to recognize it immediately. "What can I get you, hon?" "Just coffee," I muttered, barely able to meet her eyes. She nodded, disappearing behind the counter, and I let my head drop into my hands. What the hell was I supposed to do? Divorce. That was the obvious answer. But somehow, saying it, even in my own head, felt too simple, too clean. This wasn't just a breakup. This was my entire life being ripped apart. Every memory we had built together was now poisoned. Every moment of happiness now felt like a lie. The sound of my phone buzzing snapped me out of it. I yanked it out of my pocket, my pulse spiking. A message from Melissa. "Hey, just landed. Heading home soon." I stared at the words, my grip tightening on the phone. That was it. 3 days of silence, of lying to my face. And she thought she could just slide back into our life like nothing had happened? The waitress returned, setting down my coffee. "Anything else?" I forced a tight smile. "No, thanks." I watched the steam rise from the cup, the black surface reflecting my hollow expression. It was strange. Just a few days ago, I was a man who trusted his wife. Now I was a man who knew the truth. And once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. I had two choices. I could wait for her to walk through that door and confront her, watch her scramble for excuses, maybe even deny it altogether. Or I could let her keep digging her own grave, see how far she was willing to take this lie. For now, I chose the second option. I finished my coffee, left a few bills on the table, and walked out into the cool night air, the weight in my chest turning into something else. Not grief, not heartbreak, determination. She thought she could fool me. She was wrong. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house looked different. It wasn't the home I had left a few hours ago. It was just a structure now, walls that had contained my life, my marriage, my trust. The moment Melissa walked through that door, I knew everything about it would feel like a stage, a set piece in the drama she thought she was directing. I didn't turn on the lights when I stepped inside. I wanted the darkness. It gave me time to think, time to breathe. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, counting down the minutes until she would come home, playing the devoted wife after 3 days of God knows what with some guy named Brent. I sat in the armchair by the window, the same chair where I had once waited for her to come home from work, back when I trusted her. Funny how time changes the meaning of things. The sound of a car pulling up made my entire body tense. Headlights swept across the room, and then the slam of a car door. Her silhouette passed in front of the window, and I could hear the telltale rustle of her suitcase wheels against the pavement. I stayed still, my breathing controlled, as the key slipped into the lock. The door opened, and she stepped inside, humming softly to herself. She flicked on the light, and then she froze. I was right there, staring at her. For a second, there was something almost comical about it. The way her mouth parted slightly, her body stiffening like she had been caught sneaking into her parents' house after curfew. But she wasn't a teenager. She was a grown woman who had just spent 3 days lying to my face. "Leland," she exclaimed, her voice just a bit too cheerful, a bit too forced. "You scared me sitting there in the dark." She let out a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Her expression flickered, her usual confidence wavering under my silence. "I texted you when I landed. Didn't you get it?" I tilted my head slightly. "I did." She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She was waiting for me to act normal, to smile, to pretend that everything was just as she left it. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She set her suitcase down and walked toward me, forcing a warm expression. "It was such a long trip," she sighed, stretching like she was exhausted. "I need a shower and a good night's sleep." I let the silence stretch between us before finally speaking. "How was the hotel?" She blinked. "Huh. The hotel. The one you were supposed to stay at. How was it?" She let out a nervous little chuckle, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, just like any other hotel. Clean, nice, basic. Nothing special." I let the weight of my next words settle in before I spoke them. That's funny, because I called the hotel. They said they didn't have a reservation under your name, or under your company's name. Everything about her shifted in an instant. Her shoulders tensed, her pupil shrank, and for the first time in years, I saw something I hadn't seen on her face since we were younger: fear. She tried to recover quickly, her lips parting as if to throw out some excuse, but I didn't give her the chance. I stood up, closing the distance between us. "Who is Brent?" I asked, my voice level controlled. Her entire body stiffened. She had a choice in that moment. She could deny everything, try to gaslight me into thinking I was crazy, or she could tell the truth, own up to what she had done. Instead, she did something I didn't expect. She begged. Tears welled up in her eyes almost instantly, but they weren't the tears of someone who regretted what they had done. They were the tears of someone who had just realized she was caught. "Leland, I can explain," she whispered, reaching for my hands. I pulled back before she could touch me. "Go ahead. Explain." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in all the years I had known her, she was completely speechless. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. She wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. "It's not what you think," she finally muttered. "Then what is it?" I challenged. She swallowed hard. "I made a mistake." I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. "A mistake is forgetting to turn off the oven. A mistake is backing into a mailbox. You spent months lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, planning something with him." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "That's not a mistake, Melissa. That's a choice. And you made it every single day." She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Please," she whispered. "Just, please don't leave me." The audacity of it stunned me. She had betrayed me, and yet, here she was, acting as if I was the one abandoning her. But I wasn't going to give her an answer. Not yet. Instead, I picked up her suitcase and rolled it toward the door. "You can sleep somewhere else tonight," I said simply. She looked up at me, her lips trembling. No, Leland, please." I opened the door. "Go." And for the first time since she had walked back into this house, she realized she had no control over the situation anymore. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking as she grabbed the suitcase. She lingered in the doorway, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. She stepped outside. I shut the door. And just like that, she was out of my house. Out of my life. Or so I thought. The moment the door shut behind Melissa, the weight in my chest didn't lift. If anything, it got heavier. I had thought, naively, maybe, that kicking her out would bring me some sort of relief. That I'd feel triumphant, powerful even. But all I felt was empty. The house was eerily quiet now, as if it, too, was waiting for something. For years, this place had been filled with the sound of her laughter, the hum of our late-night conversations, the little rituals that made it a home. Now, it just felt like four walls full of lies. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the space where she had been sitting just minutes ago, where she had begged me not to throw her out. Her voice still echoed in my mind. "Please, just, please don't leave me." Was that regret? Or just desperation? I wasn't sure. And honestly, I didn't care. I needed answers. Real answers. Answers that weren't wrapped in fake tears and last-minute excuses. I needed to know exactly how deep her betrayal went. I grabbed her laptop again, reopening the emails I had found earlier. My hands were steady this time. I wasn't hesitating anymore. I scrolled through the messages, reading every word carefully, trying to piece together the full picture. The affair had been going on longer than I thought, almost a year. A year. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the mouse. She had spent 12 months sneaking around behind my back, making a fool out of me. While I was at home, trusting her, making dinner, asking about her day, she was meeting up with him. Lying to my face every single night, telling me she was exhausted from work while she was out with someone else. And the worst part? It wasn't just physical. It was emotional. The emails weren't just about their meetups. They were about their future, their plans. There were messages about getting away together, about how he made her feel things she hadn't felt in years, about how our marriage was holding her back, how I had become too predictable. Too predictable. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. I had been a good husband. I had given her stability, support, everything she ever said she wanted. And now, that was a bad thing? Because I wasn't exciting enough? She had rewritten our entire relationship in her head, turned me into some kind of obstacle to her real happiness. I kept scrolling, my pulse quickening as I found an attachment in one of the emails. A hotel confirmation. A different hotel from the one she had told me about. Room 206. It was booked under his name, not hers. But her name was listed as the additional guest. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. The hotel was only a 30-minute drive away. She had just come from there. Probably spent the entire weekend wrapped up in his arms, whispering about the life they were going to build together while I sat at home wondering why my wife didn't love me anymore. And now, she wanted forgiveness. Now, she wanted me to comfort her. I shut the laptop and leaned back, closing my eyes. My head was pounding, my body vibrating with adrenaline. I knew I should sleep, but I also knew I wouldn't. How could I, when every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was her lying next to him in that hotel bed? A sharp knock at the door made my eyes snap open. My whole body tensed. I didn't need to check. I already knew who it was. Melissa. I stayed frozen for a moment, debating whether I should even open it. But another knock came, harder this time, followed by her voice. Leland, please. I just need to talk. I let out a slow breath, pushing myself up from the chair. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see her standing there under the porch light, her eyes red and swollen. She was still clutching her suitcase, as if she hadn't gone anywhere at all. She swallowed hard. Can I come back inside? I stared at her for a long moment, my grip tightening on the doorknob. She had spent a year lying to me. A year throwing away our marriage like it meant nothing. And now she was asking for a second chance? I had my answer, but I wasn't sure if she was ready to hear it yet. Melissa stood on the porch, her face pale in the dim light, her fingers gripping the handle of her suitcase so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her whole body trembled, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from the weight of the moment. Leland, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Please, just let me inside. Let's talk. For a second, I almost did. Not because I wanted to hear her excuses, but because a part of me, the part that had spent years loving her, trusting her, wanted to believe this was all some kind of mistake. That there was a version of events where she wasn't the woman who had betrayed me, where she was still my wife, still the person I had built a life with. But I knew better now. I kept my hand on the doorknob, my jaw tight. Talk about what, Melissa? My voice was calm, steady. Too steady. About how you spent 3 days in a hotel with another man. About how you planned to leave me, but only after you were sure he wanted to keep you. Her lips parted, and for a split second, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control of the situation. No, it's not. She stopped herself, shaking her head. I messed up, okay? I know I did. But Stop. I cut her off. I don't want to hear your rehearsed speech. I want to hear the truth. Her breath hitched, and I could see the war in her eyes. She had two choices, lie and hope I believed her, or tell the truth and face whatever consequences came next. But Melissa had always been a coward. It didn't mean anything, she said finally, her voice trembling. It was stupid. It was a mistake. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion. A mistake. I shook my head. You planned this, Melissa. You lied to me for months. You snuck around behind my back. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A dozen choices. 100 of them. She flinched like I had slapped her, but I wasn't done. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. And let's be real. You're not here because you feel guilty. You're here because you got caught. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but I refused to let them affect me. Not this time. I took a deep breath, my grip on the door tightening. Tell me something, Melissa. If I hadn't found out, would you have told me? Silence. That was my answer. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. That's what I thought. I turned back toward the house, ready to shut the door on this conversation, on this marriage, on everything we had built. But then, she grabbed my wrist. Wait. Her voice cracked. I love you, Leland. I froze. Not because I believed her, but because of how easily she said it. Like those words still meant something. Like they still held weight. I turned back to face her, staring directly into her eyes. No, you don't, I said simply. You love what I give you. The stability. The comfort. The fact that you know, no matter what, I would have been here waiting for you. You love that I never questioned you, that I trusted you without hesitation. But you don't love me. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done this. Her breath caught in her throat, and I saw it, the exact moment she realized she had lost me. For good. I pulled my wrist free and stepped back inside. Go stay with Brent, I said, my voice empty now. That's what you wanted, right? Her face crumpled. Leland, please. I shut the door. And this time, I didn't hesitate. I stood there for a long time, my hand still on the doorknob, listening to the silence on the other side. For a few moments, I thought she might knock again, beg harder, try one last desperate attempt to claw her way back into my life. But there was nothing. Just the distant hum of the streetlights, the sound of a car driving down the road, and the occasional rustling of the wind. And then, finally, I heard her suitcase wheels scraping against the pavement. She was leaving. I exhaled slowly, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for what felt like years. I walked away from the door, my legs feeling strangely light, as if I had been carrying something heavy for too long and had only just set it down. I made my way to the couch and collapsed onto it, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality of it all sink in. She was gone. For good this time. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I didn't feel trapped. I felt free. The morning after, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains. The house was still, peaceful. No more waiting for a text that wouldn't come. No more second-guessing my gut. No more pretending that things were fine when they weren't. I got up and walked through the house, taking it all in. There was an eerie kind of calm, like the air had cleared after a storm. I brewed a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and for the first time in a long while, I actually enjoyed it. No distractions. No unease in the pit of my stomach. No wondering if my wife was really at work or sneaking around behind my back. Just me, standing in my own kitchen, drinking my coffee, and feeling more like myself than I had in years. I grabbed my phone, ignoring the unread messages from Melissa, and instead opened a new conversation. A number I hadn't texted in a long time. Hey, Ethan. Been a while. Want to grab a beer tonight? My best friend. Someone I had distanced myself from because I had been too caught up in keeping my marriage from falling apart. A message popped up almost instantly. Hell yes. About time. First round's on me. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't dreading what came next. The weight was gone. The lies were gone. The wrong person was gone. And the rest of my life? That was just beginning.